record on, right. So I'm going to, we've heard some bits and pieces about open access publishing. So I'm going to go in a bit more depth about open access publishing now. Oh, popping up on the screen. So what I'm going to be talking about is, first of all, what is open access publishing? Why you might want to open up your publications and some evidence for that, and how you can publish openly. Sorry, my Slack is coming up. How you can publish in an open access way. So I'm going to go through the different types of open access publishing, because there are many types, and preprints and what postprints are, because I haven't heard about that yet today, and different ways of publishing. So there are lots of new ways that you could actually publish. And then also thinking about other open ways of publishing. So the first bit is kind of really referring to publishing in traditional journals. And then I'm sort of moving on to the different new ways of publishing and different types of publishing, like through open access books, open source projects, and also writing in a more accessible way. So we're going to cover a huge amount of things, really. So let's start with what actually is open access. So it's really a set of principles and a range of practices through which research outputs are distributed. So this is online, free of cost, or other access barriers. And then really most of the open access movement is really to do with journal articles, as we've already sort of discussed a little bit about. The traditional journal system is very costly. The traditional one, not costly for the author, because you can put it in there free if you want to, but for the reader. So the whole open access movement was to try and make journal articles particularly free for the reader. So the cost has actually changed and come onto the authors now in some cases. There are different types of open access. So generally there's gratis open access, which is where you get immediate and permanent online access to everything, and it's free for the reader on the web. And then there's Libre open access, which is where you get everything free of charge, the same, but plus that article has an open license attached to it. So that means that you're actually free to reuse that material in the way, whatever the open license is. As Li Ying said earlier, there's different types of open licenses. So as I said, this first bit of the talk is going to really sort of focus on peer-reviewed research articles, but just to point out that really open access publishing in general does relate to lots of other types of research outputs. So it includes books, it can include conference papers, your dissertations and doctoral theses, research reports, white papers, and then other outputs as well would be included, such as data, software, blogs, podcasts, and all sorts of other research outputs that you would have. So the general term open access does apply to all research outputs, but most of the time it is referring to journal articles specifically. So if I start with like the carrots of why you would want to increase the accessibility to your publications and your other outputs, and we've heard a little bit about this already from the other speakers, but really first one, visibility and discoverability. Really, you're making your work, people able to access your work, able to read it, so it becomes more visible, you get more downloads, and hopefully you get more citations coming from that. It makes your work more transparent and therefore demonstrates the reproducibility of your work, and therefore it could actually fully be validated by peer reviewers and also the wider community, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on. That can happen at different stages in the publication process. It also adds to sustainability, because obviously if your articles and your other outputs are open, anyone can access them and reuse them in the future to build on your work, and it makes for a more inclusive research community, because you're allowing more people to have access to your work, and then that in turn creates a greater diversity in our research community. We go on to thinking about the sticks for increasing accessibility. So the first one is that a lot of funders now actually require you to have open access publications, but also other outputs as well. So let's just have a look at that in a bit more detail. So this year, the UKRI, which is the UK's research, I can't think what that stands for, but anyway, it's the funder, the big funder in the UK, where all our research, or most of our research funding comes from the government, and this is the place, UKRI. They have released a new open access policy from April 2022, so that's pretty new for us. And basically it says that everything has to be published with the CC BY license, so the Creative Commons license. So that's the one that's most open, but gives you the copyright, so people have to credit your work. It must have this data availability statement in it as well. So that's already been talked about. So you need to link to your data. So basically it's requiring your data to be open as well. And also you're not allowed to have any embargoes or delays on your publications. They have to be immediate access. So this could be through, and I'm going to talk about these different methods. So gold open access, the one that you pay for in the journal, or green open access, which is more of a self-archiving version of open access. So either of those are okay. And then also the European Research Council, as part of their new funding, which is called Horizon Europe, so this started last year, the first applications for it, they also require immediate access to publication articles. And as I said earlier, they've actually developed this new publishing platform, which actually isn't a journal at all. It's an online publication system, really, and it's completely open. So you could use that, or you could use the more traditional methods of publishing. They again want it to be with the CC BY license, they're the most open license, and the publication must have all the information and link to everything to validate your research. So that's quite a bold statement to make and require, actually. So I wonder whether they will actually stick to that or not, because at the moment, a lot of journals say this about articles have to be reproducible, but it isn't really enforced at the moment. And that would require not just your results in the paper, but linking to your data, your code, and your methods, just like the rest of our speakers have been talking about. And you also need to use a persistent identifier. So you need to use a digital object identifier to identify all of your research objects, so the data code, the methods, and also an ORCID, which is a very important thing to make sure that you use, because it's a persistent identifier for you as a researcher. So it's a good way that people can track your research from looking at your ORCID account, and it's free to sign up for that. So you can just sign up. And then this is also similar to what they have in America as well. Obviously, other countries do have them. I just kind of picked the ones that I'm more familiar with. The National Science Foundation. So from 2016, they required of the version of record, which is what would be in a journal, the actual journal, or the final peer-reviewed version, so sort of unformatted version of your article, to be deposited in a type of repository, but they're quite specific about what those repositories are. So you would have to look into that, but they do allow a 12-month embargo period. So it's not quite as strict as in Europe or the UK. So the other sticks for increasing accessibility would be that your own institution requires open access. So some institutions do have particular policies on open access. So it is really worth checking into what are the requirements and policies within your own institution. And then the last one being that some journals now are open access only. So if you want to, and some of them are quite what would be considered, I don't want to use the word good, but high impact, I suppose, might be the word, instead of good journals. Sometimes that's a bit debatable if those two things match up. But anyway, if you want to publish in an open access journal, you don't have a choice. Basically, you have to pay the article processing charge, so the cost for open access. So you would have to find that somehow. And also those open access journals, they all require, so it's mandatory to link to your open data and code. Whereas some of the other journals that are, I would call the hybrid journals, that allow you to pay for open access or go the completely traditional route, which is not paying for, but it's behind the paywall for the reader. it's a bit looser in terms of actually providing the data and the code linked in your article. So, so what is the evidence for going open access, basically? So we've already heard that there is higher citations, basically. There's been a lot of studies, and this study that I'm linking to here in my slides is one that has collated lots of different studies together to look at what they all say, basically. So they found that in the studies that they looked at, 76% of those studies did find that there was an open access citation advantage. So these were studies from different disciplines. So really what it's saying is that overall, it's been found that there is higher citations for open access papers. So that's a good thing. And there's also, and Li Ying, she said this as well from another example, but this is quite a recent paper that shows that there is a 25% higher citation impact for papers that include links to their data in the repository. So just not just having open access paper, but linking out to your other research outputs as well gives you even more of an advantage. Okay, so let's go on to the different types of open access publishing. And as I said, there's quite a lot of different types, and they all are, for some reason, given colours. I have no idea why they've been given all these colours to represent them, but this is just what we've got. So with these, I'm really thinking, and they generally relate to journal articles, but actually other types of publications, specifically open access books, are often referred to using this sort of colour system as well. The most known about really are the gold and green open access options, which are at the top here. So I'm not going to cover those because I'm going to cover those in a bit more detail in the next few slides. So if I work up from the bottom, I'm going to start with black open access. And this is where you put the final version, so the version of record that would be in the actual journal, so the published version, you put that onto an academic social media site, such as Academia or ResearchGate, or it's about the online platform called Sci-Hub, which accesses lots of articles. So people have differing opinions about this type of open access, because it's black because it's actually illegal. So, but it does allow more and more people to have access. So on ResearchGate and Academia, lots of people put this published version, this final version of record, onto ResearchGate or Academia. And that's not actually the right practice, because that is actually illegal and people do get fined for it and things like that. So if you want to use those particular websites for, which I think they're very good, I would class them as social media websites for academics, because it's really good to collaborate and find out about what other people are doing, but make sure that you're putting the right version, not the final version. You're putting probably your peer-reviewed version, which is called a post-print, but it's not formatted for the fancy looking in the journal version. So that is acceptable on ResearchGate and Academia, but not that final version. So just be aware that that actually is an illegal act. Saying that though, Sci-Hub is amazing. And if you have a problem accessing journals, it's something that you might want to do yourself. I won't admit to doing it, but you probably know that I do. And then the other ones to think about are Platinum and Diamond, which are quite similar. And that's where a particular institution or professional society funds a journal, and therefore all of the authors in it actually will publish for free, and the readers will also be able to access that for free. So that's a particularly great thing, I would say. And then the bronze one in the middle is where we get sorry, all my notifications are going off. The bronze one in the middle is where the author pays for the journal article to be immediately or embargoed open access, but they actually they don't pay for the rights to reuse that article, so it sort of takes away a little bit of your rights, and that's why it's slightly different to gold and green, but it's kind of the same thing in a sense. So so just to go on then to the sort of probably more known ways of open access publishing journal articles. So probably the most well known is gold open access. And this is where you get the immediate access, and you're paying for this immediate access for everybody to read, download, and use your article. And any supplementary files as well will be open in the publication, so immediate access. But you're paying the article processing charge, and that is paid by the author. So that can cost a lot. So it can cost up to thousands of pounds. So in Nature or Science, which are the really high priced ones, it can be £2,000 to £3,000 or $2,000 to $3,000, depending on where it's based. But it actually can be down to as little as about £50 or $50. And it just depends on the journal. So my first kind of tip, if you want to do gold open access, is to just investigate the costs of some of these charges, because they do differ a lot. You can get funding for the cost of gold open access. So if you have funding from UKRI or other big funders, then you actually get some money to do gold open access. So it's within your funding that you win for your project. You might also be able to get some money from your institution. There might be funds that you can apply for. And also institutions themselves have made deals with certain publishers to allow their researchers to always do gold open access in particular journals, or get a discount for gold open access. So there are quite a few ways to cut down the cost of that. What you can also do, which not many people really do, I have found, or know about, is you can actually ask not to pay. So this is something that I have done in the past, and I've succeeded, because I've just said, I don't have any money to do this at the moment, but I really want it to be open access. And most of the time when you email, so you've got to have a legitimate reason. I was between jobs, or I had a very poorly paid job or something at that particular time. And for students, unemployed, people on low incomes from different regions, like I was talking about the Global South authors as well, ask for a fee waiver. You can email the editor, and sometimes when you submit your article, it's actually part of the system that you do online. When you submit your article, is they ask you if you want to ask for a fee waiver. Okay, so that's a good thing to do. And also what I found about that is sometimes they don't actually reply to you until after the article is published, and then you get sent an invoice. Don't pay that invoice. Send another email back and say, I actually applied for a fee waiver, and then they send you back an email saying, fine, don't worry about that. So it's worth just keep asking for it, because these big charges that they are taking in from people who've got the money pay for these fee waivers. That's why they put the money up. So somebody needs to take the fee waivers. The other thing you can also do is you can apply for an actual funding for the article processing charge, so an actual grant. So an archaeological journal that actually does this is Internet Archaeology. So you can apply for this online and then get published in, because they are completely open access journal, but you can apply for funds through their website. So there are lots of ways to kind of get around that so that you get this citation advantage. The other way around it is to go the green open access publishing route for traditional journals. So it's completely free to do this. And actually, pretty much I would say most, or if not 99.9% of journals now accept this as a publishing route. So you would, you can put your, so there's quite a few ways you can do this. You could put your preprint onto a preprint server or one of the online repositories that we've heard about today. Then you can submit your article to a journal. So your preprint would be out there, but and then you've gone and submitted it to a journal as well. And then when you get the peer-reviewed version back, you can put what's called a postprint. So the postprint is an article that has been peer-reviewed and revised. So it's the last version before it then would be formatted for the actual final version of record, the one that is actually published in the journal. So this postprint, you could also put that on as well. So I generally put a preprint on somewhere, Open Science Framework. Then when I've revised it, I put the postprint on as well. And it's actually good to create a record of the changes, to have your preprint up there, have your postprint up there as well. And then you might also have the version of record in a journal as well. So that's kind of one way that you can go for this green open access. But just the words of caution are, do check if the journal allows it, because there still are very few that don't. Most of the big ones, I think, on archaeology do allow it. And you must be, as I said before, it's illegal to put the final version of record on any site. That's the one that's in the published journal, the formatted version. So do not do that. But it has to be, it can be the preprint that you put for green open access, or it could be the postprint. Okay. But yeah, don't put this journal final version of record anywhere. So to do this, you could use a preprint server. So these ones I've just picked out, I think they're probably the most appropriate ones for archaeology or paleoecology or something like that related to our discipline. So these are specific just for preprints, so for your actual articles, but you can just put it on an open repository. So I actually go for the open repository route, and either I put mine on Zenodo, or usually I actually use Open Science Framework if I've got data and everything like that linked to it. So I will sort of package it up as one project and have the preprint, the data, the code, the documentation all in one place, a bit like you were shown earlier, and sort of keep adding and adding and adding to that actual project on Open Science Framework. So just a little word. So I've been talking mostly about you being an author, but we're also readers of articles as well. So how do we get access to journal articles openly? And I'm thinking about people, because I have to say I am in the position at the moment where I don't really have a lot of access to journal articles. I work mostly at the Alan Turing Institute, and they do not pay for any journals. So you might be very surprised about that, because they're a very large research institution in the UK, actually a national research institution in the UK, but they just take the stance that they don't pay any publishers. That's kind of one thing they've decided. So if we want to access things, what do I do? Okay, so one of the great things that I found is Unpaywall. So Unpaywall actually, if you go on this website here, and I've put this in the resource document, it's actually a Chrome extension, so it's a Google Chrome extension that you can put onto your web browser. And when you go onto the article, the journal, and you've got your article, and it's basically saying, oh, you've got to pay. Yeah, it's blocked because it's not gold open access. There's like a little button that looks like this that comes up on the side of your screen, of your browser screen, and it will turn a certain color. So if there's a green open access version of that article, it will turn green. If it just stays sort of gray, it means there is nothing for you to access. So this is very, very helpful, because a lot of journal articles now do have a green open access version of them if there's no gold open access. So this is incredibly helpful to have actually just in your browser. I actually haven't enabled, oh, it's up here, you can see it here on mine, actually, it's up right in the top there. So another thing that I found really useful is actually ResearchGate, which is why I don't want to completely say that it's an awful thing, because I think it's great for networking. And what you can do is often people will put, I've written this article, and they might just put a little advert on their sort of their profile on ResearchGate, but not the actual article. So what I do then, if I know the person, or actually not, I don't even do if I know the person, any person, I will just, there's a button on there you can press to request the article from the author. And that's really useful. Most of the time people will send it to you. So I found people to be very friendly and nice about that. If they're not on ResearchGate, then you can email the author, okay, or anyone else that's on the author list, okay. The only thing about that is actually quite a lot of the time the corresponding author, their email address is out of date. So it might be worth actually just Googling that person and finding out where their position is, because lots of people move jobs quite frequently in research. So most people I found do send them. Or you could use someone that you know that's an academic already that has access. And you know, I've had people before when I've been doing projects and I sent them a list and they've downloaded like 10 or something articles for me at a time and sent them to me. So there are some lovely people out there that will help you. So do use people that you know, and they're probably all going to hate me now for saying that. And then I think as your last resort, you can use Sci-Hub, because as I've said, it is a bit illegal. Well, it is illegal. but it's very good because you can get most things that you need off it if you were to ever use it, because I'm not saying that I have ever used it. But what I think I want to highlight, so what I've been talking about before in the last few slides really is about the traditional way of publishing, so through publishing in a journal, okay? But things are actually really changing now. And I heard earlier this year a talk which was pretty controversial at a very large open science conference called Open Science Fair, where the speaker actually said, and it's a speaker, he's Robert Terry, and he's from the World Health Organization, and he's very senior there, so this is a very large organization. I mean, he said that journals are dead, okay? It was a very strong statement to make. He said that they're very wasteful, they're very biased, and he said that there is no version of record, so no actual final version of an article, because he thinks that science is very dynamic and always changing and evolving, and that we should be publishing in that way, that there is a constant movement within the publications that we are putting out and the results that we are putting out. So I think that this is a really interesting concept, and I think this is the way that publishing is going at the moment. And I've already said about the Open Research Europe platform and these pre-printing publishing platforms that build in open peer reviewing and sort of different versions of articles along the way that is recorded. This is the way that publishing, I think, in academia is going. And I think we in archaeology will sort of fall into this way of publishing, because it's a way that it's free. It's something that the platforms are established by very large organizations and paid for in that way. So there's no cost to the actual authors themselves. It's taken on by funders and institutions. And that's kind of the way that publishing is going. So one of these systems, which already been mentioned, is, so I suppose it's also taken on by the community, because this really is a community effort, peer community in archaeology. And there's a number of different peer community in journals for this one, for ecology, and I can't think of the other ones, but there's lots of different ones basically. And this is where you upload a preprint to a preprint server, and then you submit it to peer community in through their website, and then it gets sent out to reviewers. So the problem really with peer printing, the pre-printing system, where actually the original system is that preprints are just out there and they're kind of not reviewed. This brings in the reviewing part of it really. So you've submitted your preprint to peer community in archaeology. It's sent out to some peer reviewers, and they have a number of recommenders who are people who've kind of been vetted in their system as experts, and they will select people to peer review these articles. And then the recommender is a little bit like an editor of a normal traditional journal. So the peer reviews will come back, the preprint will be revised several times, and a complete record, it's very open, the record of peer review that has been done and the comments that are made. So then a final peer review preprint will be uploaded, and then the person who's the recommender, so like the editor, will write the recommendation that this is up to the standard, it's passed peer review, and they recommend it to be published as a peer-reviewed preprint. And then this is actually what then gets linked to, it is actually, in the end, it is actually formatted quite nicely, the article, into what looks like a journal article actually. So it's very similar, but you could at the end of the process, because where it says step 5, which I've kind of missed off on this side, once it's recommended here, you have actually completed, in a sense, the research life cycle, because you've published your final results, they've been peer reviewed and they've been accepted. So in a sense, that is actually the end of your research process. But some people then choose to actually put those articles, those peer reviewed preprints, into a journal, and peer community in is linked into quite a lot of archaeology journals. So it's very simple then to send it to those journals, and it will very quickly then be published in those journals, because it's already been peer reviewed. So it doesn't go through the peer review process again. So I think it's a really good way of working, because it's completely free, this service, so there's no, and it's completely open. So it's open in the sense that your preprints out there, your different versions of your preprints will be there. The peer review comments and recommendations will be also published. So it is very open, but it's done in the same way as traditional articles, if you see what I mean, reviewed in the same way. So it's just going away from the cost of gold open access in a sense. Okay, so I mean, the other way that we are really moving away from traditional journals, I think, is in the fact that we are now moving away from these standalone articles. So what I mean by this is that a lot of articles still, but we're definitely moving beyond this, are just having the writing up of your results with no data or anything else linked to it. But what we're doing now is we are moving, like we've seen today, moving into these more sometimes interactive articles, but definitely articles that have a lot more detail linked to them. And this is what we would really call reproducible articles or replicable articles. So it's an article that actually you could really completely validate. You could actually go in, you could look at the methods, you could use those methods because they would be a method that would be completely understandable. There would be the data there, the raw data that you could reuse again or rerun again the code as well, because they are linking code to it. And also quite a lot of disciplines now are putting in executable code. So this is where they actually create containers around their data and their code. So actually the link that you press actually brings you into a sort of web interface, which allows you to completely rerun the code straight away. So you can actually rerun it within the environment that they've created for you. So this is kind of the new sort of direction of these sort of reproducible research articles. But there's also, and this is what I really like about open science, is this way that we're embracing different types of publications. So I try to work in a very open source way. So I actually think that publication happens not at the end of your research project, but actually throughout, and it's a continuous process of publication. So here I've just, I kind of call it the open access spectrum or something like that. I've been calling it. It's like it's a different way of thinking of publishing. So these are some examples that I wanted to show you. So things like having an open source project, because basically you're continuously updating what you're doing. It's out there for someone to see. So that is publication. You know, you can put as Sam said, you can do a pre-registration report. You can use academic social media. During data collection, you could be putting out your training materials. You could have an open field book or lab book. You can also talk to wider community groups about what you're doing. So you're engaging with different audiences. During data analysis, you might put your data out there and your metadata into open repositories, linking to your open code. Then there's the preprints and postprints. You've got conference talks, which you can put out there as videos and documentation as well. And then the reporting phase, so your final articles, a data paper, blogs. The research compendia is what Sam was talking about with Project Tier, which is where you have a set of files that links to your final article. So it's kind of the file structure. It's called the research compendium. And then the reviewing phase, you can have like open peer review. You could have community reviews of your work. And you can also give talks and adapt your work for sort of wider audiences. So I think that open science is great in thinking about this whole spectrum of outputs that you have from research, not this standalone article that we all sort of still have, unfortunately, in this very high position of impact. But actually, I think all of this is giving you your project greater and greater impact if you sort of embrace all of these different ways of publishing your research. So just to link up with a few of these, I'll skip over this one because Sam's already covered pre-registrations and registered reports. And this is just different types of articles that you could actually publish. There's also data papers, which Li Ying also went through. So I have to say I love data papers. It's one of the things I'm writing actually 3 data papers at the moment in different projects. But it's a way that you can actually, I like it because it's a way that you're making all this effort to make your data set open. This is a way of claiming the credit for that work because you're actually presenting what you've done in a very transparent way. You don't write anything about interpretation. It's literally just describing the data and the methods that you've used to collect it. And again, it makes your actual data set more fair, because you're giving it another DOI with actually the metadata really around the data. And that makes it more findable and accessible as a data set. And then another one that hasn't been talked about is actually software papers. So a lot of researchers now actually develop new software and software packages. Like Karoune was just talking about R. You can actually create your own R packages for different types of analysis, and you could publish those in a journal and you get credit for that as well. So there's different journals, JOSH, which is the Journal of Open Source Software, or there's actually the Journal of Computer Applications in Archaeology. They also accept software papers. And then different things to publish. So archaeologists like to write books. I have to say, I would really like to write a book, but I don't know when I'm ever going to find time to do that. So, but you can do it, definitely do it open these days. So there are different ways of doing this. You can approach publishers. They often put out adverts for competitions to apply for open access. So put in your proposals and maybe win it, or you can have a negotiation with them. So this is called a BPC, so book processing charge. So somebody has to pay that. It's the same as sort of an article processing charge. So there are different ways of either paying that or getting out of paying that, I suppose. You can publish a Kindle book actually for free. So that's a good way of doing it. And actually you can make electronic books using R or using Jupyter books. So actually that's kind of an extension of what Karoune was talking about, making R markdown files. You can actually make a set of files which link up into a book that you could then put online. So there's quite a lot of tools now that you can learn to actually publish your own books. You don't have to go down the publisher route. And there's a really good website there that I put here about open access books, and they have a really good toolkit. So I've linked this into the resource document so you can have a look. I'm just checking time because I think I've been speaking for a very long time. Yeah, I'll try and go a bit more quickly. So another thing, the thing that I really love to do is have an open source project. So my Phytolith project at the moment, which I'm working on with Celine, that's here today. Our project is open from the very beginning. So it's set up in a GitHub repository. As you can see, I've already got my license in there because that's the first thing I put in there. It's also enabled into a website. So it links to a website through GitHub, which is a cool thing to learn how to do. And it is going to be archived in Zenodo. So you can, like Open Science Framework, which you can link to GitHub, you can also link Zenodo to GitHub, which is like an archiving service in a way. So you can archive a version of your GitHub repository onto Zenodo for like long-term storage. And that's when you get your DOI, because as was said before, GitHub doesn't give you this persistent identifier, and that's what you do need if you're going to archive and get long-term storage for your project. Also on here, which is super important, is that we have contributing guides, because we're an open source project, which means we actually are encouraging people to work with us in our community. So we're telling people what they can do, and we've also got a code of conduct as well to tell people how we want them to act. So basically be nice to each other and that sort of thing. But we also, I mean, we use it as a project management tool, because GitHub is a very collaborative online tool that you can use to actually produce project boards and things like that to work in a collaborative project. So this is an example of an electronic book, an open source book, which is the Turing Way, which I work on at the Turing. But anyone can come and contribute to this resource, which is about reproducible research and lots of different types of research and research things people do in research, like communication and collaboration. So this is basically a book that's based on a GitHub repository. So everything that's written is inside the repository, and then it is enabled using some fancy things like Jupyter Book to make it into an online ebook, and it's a completely free way of doing it. And then lastly, I think I just want to say a bit of a note about that we should really be thinking about disseminating our research more widely, and this really links to accessibility. So, you know, the way that we write in academia is in a particularly closed and very specific way. We generally write in academic journals for the audience of our particular discipline. So we use a lot of jargon, we write in very specific ways, sometimes it's in quite a passive way, and not very approachable for other people in other disciplines. So, so some things that journals are doing is maybe bringing in lay summaries where you write like a simplified version. You can also change your research into other types of outputs like blogs and podcasts, websites. You think about speaking to other types of conferences rather than just in your discipline. Translation is very important as well, because I think we had the comment earlier that sometimes, and particularly us as archaeologists, we do work with actual people. You know, we have to think about the communities that actually where we're doing the research and what languages they speak, and you know, is it actually important to be in English? So you know, other outputs could be in other languages so that we enable other people to read our research and access it. And then also thinking about, like when we're doing outputs, thinking about accessibility for disabilities. So this could be like I said earlier about your training materials and things like that. You could, well, you should think about how you can make them very accessible. So by putting different versions online so that different types of people can access them. And I mean, one thing that I think is quite surprising is that a lot of journal articles, the figures that you see in the journal articles are really inaccessible to a lot of people. So if you think about someone who is colorblind, that's one thing that you should think about when you're making figures, because a lot of the color palettes that we choose, a lot of people with color blindness can't actually make any distinction between some of the bars or the whatever colors we put on there. So it's something just to bear in mind. And also things like putting alternative text with your figures as well for people who have sight impairment. And actually it's quite hard to write a very good alternative text statement to go with your figures, because often they're quite complex, but it's okay to actually write a lot and insist that that is put into your journal article. Because I recently, when I submitted a paper, I said that I wanted to do this, and they said, well, we've never done that before. And I said, but I really want it to be done. So they actually did find a way for me to do it. So I think it's a good thing to insist on as a sort of standard practice when you're submitting articles. Right. So lastly, because I have jabbered on for a very long time, the small steps that I think maybe you can take are finding out about gold open access options at your institution or from your funders, or maybe from some grants from different associations that you are with. You could also think about choosing a preprint server or an open repository for depositing green open access papers. So have a go at signing up for an account. And then also investigating other ways of publishing. So thinking about how you might disseminate your research to your wider audience, maybe through doing blogging or podcasts or something like that. I think that is everything. So are there any questions? I think probably it's time for us to have a break. Are there any questions? I will stop sharing when I'm going to stop the video.